philosophical segue for Luciferianism, for the doctrine of man made a God without God. But the dominant ecclesiastical authority through secularization is gradually supplanted by a new theocratic order bodied forth by an occult counterculture movement that basically veils itself in secularism. And secularization basically acts as a segue period for shifts in the religious cultural milieu. And this is why the Promethean radicals of socio-political utopianism were stridently secular, yet at the same time entertained this preoccupation with the occult.
Yeah.
Well, of course, every theocracy requires a myth to edify its adherents, to basically keep the masses in line, to basically keep adherents faithful. And, of course, the new scientistic order of things. And by scientistic, I mean scientism, holding aloft the investigational methods of science as the only means of gaining the truth, the one and only path to truth. The new scientistic order required scientistic myths. And the brand new myth kind of worked a little bit like this. While scientific materialists and their fellow travelers, whether they be physicalist, functionalist, secular, humanist, behaviorist, Marxist, well, while they go and relegate texts such as the biblical Eden account to mere myth, their myth is a reiteration of the Edenic motif, and it remains firmly embedded within their own secular worldview. It just simply has a new metaphysical garb about it. And the myth works like this. In the beginning, Eden was a singularity, which was eventually divided into countless pluralities by the Big Bang. And according to the myth, the reconstitution of Eden is achieved through evolution, which invariably requires the assistance of man, spelled with a capital M, to signify humanity's potential to achieve apotheosis through the evolutionary process. Man unites evolution with the science of progress, which is bodied forth through biological methodologies, be it eugenics or population control, and then, of course, social methodologies, whether that be fascism, communism, or other forms of socio-political utopianism. And as evolution is guided down the desired course, man returns to the singularity, which is politically expressed through world government, a socialist, totalitarian, one-world order. And thus, Eden is reborn. However, Eden remains confined to the ontological plane of the physical universe, and immortality is attainable only through the continuity of the species. Now, if elements of this mythology sound familiar, it's because it's certainly nothing new. It is derivative of ancient occult cosmologies, particularly Gnosticism. The only difference is that the scientistic version stipulates an eschaton, that is the end, heaven and hell, residing entirely within the physical universe. And this basically became the edifying myth of every modern scientific dictatorship. Now, one of the most crucial myths to maintaining scientific dictatorships and this new scientistic theocratic power structure that was rising amongst the power elites, one of the most crucial myths to the maintenance of that was Darwinism. And Darwinism itself functions as a Gnostic myth. It denies the transcendent origin of being and validates the metaphysical claim of self-creation with the religious doctrine of self-salvation. Now, Gnosticism, of course, comprised a portion of the Masonic belief system, and this is significant because the British Royal Society, which promoted Darwinism, was arguably a Masonic institute. Virtually all its founding members were Freemasons. And the science that these men would promote, that the fellows of the British Royal Society would promote, would synchronize with their Gnostic beliefs. And Darwinism was precisely such a science. Darwin's theory actually was promulgated by several other more esoteric thinkers. It was basically promoted by John Locke, who was basically reiterating the precepts of reincarnation and other concepts from Eastern occult religions within the realm of metaphysical materialism and metaphysical naturalism. And John Locke would develop a theory of evolution that would receive the approval of all the male members of Darwin's theory. And Charles's grandfather, a Freemason by the name of Erasmus Darwin, also developed the precursory theory of evolution that would provide the groundwork for origins of the species. And before Erasmus, of course, there was John Locke.
Mm-hmm. So Darwin wasn't in on it, so to speak. It was just being used as this implementer.
Darwin was pretty much a recluse, and all he was doing was basically building on earlier work of earlier theoreticians, be it his grandfather, John Locke, and other thinkers. And it was men such as T.H. Huxley, of course, who was both a member of the British Royal Society, a member of the Secretive X Club, and also a Freemason, that would work to promulgate his theory. I contend because they saw its socio-political applications. They saw what it could achieve if disseminated on the popular level, which of course it was disseminated on the popular level, resulting in such governmental aberrations as communism, fascism. But this is because Darwinism, with its biological determinism and other features of its extremely morbid and authoritarian philosophy, dignifies socialist totalitarian forms of government. And this was precisely the form of government, the type of society that the men of the British Royal Society was hoping to impose upon the rest of the world. To give you an idea, Erasmus Darwin, Charles's grandfather, who also developed the precursory theory of evolution, supported the radical Jacobins who carried out the bloodbaths of the French Revolution. And many of the people who populated his little quasi-secret society, the Lunar Society, were also intimately involved in the French Revolution. They were socio-political utopians. They were technocrats, and by technocrats I mean adherents to the belief in technocracy, a form of government which basically calls for the rule by a self-proclaimed cognitive elite, a rule by policy professionals, by experts. But these sort of men were the men that shaped Charles Darwin's thinking. And this, of course, remains firmly embedded within evolutionary theory. In evolution, you have this hierarchical form of society being proposed, but it's a hierarchy no longer based on somebody's communion with super-sensible entities, with the gods no longer acting as a mediator for some otherworldly power, but instead it's a hierarchy based on genetics. And of course, Charles Darwin himself, although he opposed slavery, and you have to give him credit for that, Charles Darwin himself was a racist. He considered black people to be an inferior race. Many of the men surrounding him also were opposed to the integration of black people into regular society. T.H. Huxley was opposed to the emancipation of black people, and of course, some of them promoted the policies of extermination and colonial warfare, which would later on body itself forth through the imperialist crusade of none other than I'm sorry, kind of lost his name. None other than the protege of John Ruskin, I'm sorry, lost my train of thought.
No, it's no problem. I mean, yeah.
But yes, the colonial warfare that was waged against the Africans during the later part of the 19th century owed itself largely to this evolutionary racism. And it was Cecil Rhodes.
Okay, yeah. So I had it on my mind too, but
yeah.
Okay, sure.
And of course, out of Cecil Rhodes would come the Rhodes Roundtable groups.
Yeah.
And the Rhodes Roundtable groups would basically form the Royal Institute for International Affairs, and the Royal Institute for International Affairs would establish a state-preside branch here in the United States known as the Council on Foreign Relations, which acts as this nation's foreign policy cartel, and basically has trumpeted the charge of globalization throughout the majority of the 20th century. But again, this was all pretty much legitimized and given edification by the Gnostic myth of Darwinism. Darwinism provided the scientific foundation for Masonry's socio-political utopianism, which was also Gnostic because of its mandate for immanentizing the eschaton on this ontological plane of existence. And this, of course, was the mandate of both communism and fascism. In this sense, communist and fascist qualify as secular Gnostics. Both Marx and Hitler find their philosophical roots with Hegel, whose early work was influenced by a Gnostic Kabbalist, Christoph Oedinger. And of course, Hegel would develop the dialectic, which Marx would redirect towards the realm of socioeconomics. The Hegelian dialectic is now part and parcel of the elite strategy for ideological divide and conquer.
Yeah.
It involves the polarizing of the masses with conflicting ideologies which are incrementally synthesized into a single ideology with the worst features of the two opposing camps being predominant. For instance, the dialectic of capitalism against communism, or monopolistic capitalism against communism, is ending in a sort of feudal corporatism. And the earlier dialectic of communism against fascism resulted in internationalism. Even earlier than that, you had the dialectic of Protestantism against Catholicism, which synthesized to birth the secular state. And of course, again, secularization acted as a segue period for the introduction of a new theocratic order, a scientistic one, albeit, but a new theocratic order nonetheless. But all these dialectical syntheses are progressing toward a great synthesis and immanentized eschaton on this ontological plane of existence. In geopolitical terminology, that translates to a one-world socialist totalitarian government. Now, such a dialectical framework also comprises the Gnostic myth of Darwinism, the organism